what is we got a slide for this up on the screen as well. Marriage is one man, one woman in a covenant relationship for the purpose of glorifying God. There we go, that's up on the screen. And then we looked at the next thing that we looked at is sex and how God created sex. And sex is good inside of marriage. And so, there we go, all right? And then the next piece that we looked at is being created in the image of God and what it means to be made in the image of God. And being made in the image of God means that we are like God and we represent him. And God created us in his image distinctly as male and female. And we should celebrate those differences, and those are good differences. And then last, we looked at what it means to actually kind of live that out and some of that distinctiveness. And we looked at manhood and womanhood, and that's the men have the responsibility to sacrificially lead. That's the protection and provision and self-control. And women are the invaluable helper. They make things so much better, and they complement one another. And so throughout this whole series, you guys have been given a chance to submit questions. And so we had like 20-something questions come in. And we're going to try to tackle most, if not all of them, tonight. And so with that, I have my lovely wife, Lauren, up here. She's going to help kind of talk through some of the things. And Billy is going to be kind of...
Hey-oh. Oh, this mic's not on.
Not yet.
5.
And Billy is going to be kind of setting, launching the bowls, the footballs,
Thank you.
the questions. MC.
MC.
He's going to MC. All right.
Who's gonna MC? Whoa, that's loud. Can I turn that down?
Oh, you even got me a cup of water?
Yeah.
Yes, we got you a cup of water.
Yeah.
Man.
We're chit-chatting.
We're chit-chatting. So we want this to kind of feel a little bit more informal for you guys.
Like
So
it.
For you guys.
for you guys.
You guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because this is all for you. Not just because it's scripted that way, but I think we should start with relationships as a whole. And the first question that we have, I'm gonna start with you, Stephen.
Okay.
Right? And then we'll come back and get the other side of things so we can hear both ends of it. Can a girlfriend stop you from finding a wife?
Finding a wife. Can a girlfriend stop you from finding a wife? So I guess that kind of depends on what that girlfriend is and why are you in a relationship with that person. Because the way that I look at things is a relationship always has a purpose. And as you're in a relationship, what kind of tends to happen is you go from less intimacy to closer and closer and closer and greater intimacy. That's kind of how relationships generally work and function. As you spend time with that person, you want to gravitate towards being closer and closer. And so to kind of with the question, if you have a girlfriend and you have no intention of getting like closer to that person towards marriage, then yeah, that will stop you. But if that's a relationship with a girl that you have that you want to kind of continue towards marriage, then that's not going to stop you. So I think it depends on the relationship and what's that purpose of the relationship? Are you looking to kind of bring it towards marriage, or is it just something that you're just, doing it just because you want to have a girlfriend?
On the flip side, if the girlfriend or boyfriend, for that matter, doesn't want deeper, then that's a problem too. And they could stop you from finding your spouse because it has to be mutual.
Yeah. Suppose you're trying to find a husband or a wife and you're in this other relationship that you know is going nowhere, then that would absolutely stop it. Because what if the person that you ideally would want to marry is out there and they look at you in a relationship, they're like, well, you're already taken. So, yeah.
So potentially.
It could.
It could.
Yeah.
It could. Depends.
Going nowhere. Although none of you guys should be looking for a husband or a wife yet. Way too soon. Way too early. Live some life. I promise. So since we're talking about having girlfriends and we're talking about having boyfriends and dating and all of that, what does dating look like for Christians? Is there such a thing as dating for fun?
I do. Well, we thank you for your honesty.
I would say that
It depends on your definition of dating. I think going to like prom and having a prom date is totally fine.
That can be in a
That
kind of
can
a
be
different
an
category.
isolated, I think I consider that isolated in a different category than, quote, dating relationship. I mean, it might lead to one, but I consider those types of isolated things separate. And I firmly believe that dating is for the purpose of finding your spouse. So if you're not looking to find a spouse, then you really shouldn't be dating. That's my
Yeah.
opinion. Some people might disagree.
Yeah. And some people disagree, but I think the disagreeing is, if you disagree, I think you have to have a good reason why. I think, so I agree with Lauren in that dating and a relationship, a boyfriend, girlfriend, has a purpose. And that purpose is really kind of, as I said earlier, it moves closer and closer to intimacy. And as you get older and as you get more mature, and you're getting closer to that timetable of like, are we ready for marriage? We want to get married. It's really to help you kind of refine, is this someone that I want to spend the rest of my life with? Because dating relationships, that's really kind of the purpose, is to be exclusive and not just, oh, with whoever. It's this exclusivity. And that exclusivity is really something that we find ultimately in marriage. That's what marriage is about. It's a covenant relationship between two people who want to say, I'm going to commit the rest of my life to you, and I'm going to choose to love you unconditionally, and going both ways. And so dating for fun, I think dating is, and the purpose of that is really to find, is this someone that you want to kind of move forward in a relationship that ultimately, I think, pinnacles in marriage. And so, because otherwise, if you're not quite ready for that, you set yourself for a lot of temptation to go too far and too much with the physical and the sexual side of things. We had another question out in the audience.
What about jointure? What about marriage after death?
Marriage after death. Oh, that's a good one. So, actually, Jesus talks about this. We're going to shoot this one off the fly. Jesus talks about that in, I'm trying to remember exactly where, but he says that we are going to be like the angels in that, not like angels in that the spiritual beings with just purely spiritual beings, because we are both spiritual and physical beings. I think we come to that later. But it says that we're going to be like the angels in that we don't marry. It doesn't say that we're going after death. So after death, we don't marry if you go to heaven. There's not going to be marriage as a thing. There's still going to be maleness and femaleness, but marriage is not something that, at least from my recollection of what Jesus is saying, is that we're not going to be married in heaven.
I believe it's we are neither given or taken in marriage on the other side. I know the story you're talking about.
I'd have to, maybe when she talks, I could
I'd have to pull it up.
look up the verse.
I feel like we won't need it because we'll be with God. So
Yeah.
marriage is to help show the true fullness of God in that relationship. And I mean, we'll be with God. We'll have that relationship, close intimacy. So we won't need that type of intimacy in heaven.
I believe I've heard it described that marriage is an earthly representation of a heavenly reality. And so if we're in that heavenly reality, we don't have to have an earthly representation of it. And so, like, we can't wrap our heads around, like, the awesomeness that is heaven. Scripture describes that specifically and says, like, you can't even fathom, you can't even think of it, how awesome it is and how great it is. And so it's something that we can't wrap our heads around to understand. And so trying to understand earthly things that we have here that are for our good here, on the other side, we have everything that we need in Christ, in the presence of Christ. Yeah. And so...
I think I'll just end with this last. I found the verse, Matthew 22:30. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. So that's what Jesus has to say. So
There it is.
there we go. Yeah, I think we will know our family. Absolutely, we will recognize people. We're just not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but we will recognize people. Yeah, good stuff.
One thing on the other one, the question that started this, that I think it's important to put out too. Everyone who is in a dating relationship is typically on their best behavior.
Yes.
You don't really see that real person until you see them in certain hard, like, instances in life. And those are things that need to be seen before marriage should be contemplated, I think. So keep that in mind if you are dating or when you start dating. They're usually on their best behavior.
You are too.
Kind of unwrap that a little
Yeah.
bit. So if you marry a divorced person, is that bad?
That's a good question. So I think we first need to understand a little bit about divorce, and we talked about this a little bit in our series. And divorce, Jesus goes in Matthew 5 and Matthew 19. He says that divorce was never really part of God's plan and intent, but we are given divorce as an option because it's sometimes necessary because of sin can be so great. Inside of a relationship, people can hurt one another so much. And in Matthew 5 and Matthew 19, Jesus says that anyone who gets a divorce except for, the translation is sexual immorality, and it's this idea of cheating and just like total kind of betrayal. He says if you're getting divorced for other than that, he says that's not a good reason, that's not a legitimate reason to get divorced. And so I think first we need to understand that there's a legitimate reason for divorce, and then there's also some reasons that people get divorced that aren't necessarily really good. And so I think that's the first step. And what Jesus also says is, because they're talking about how do we do this remarriage thing? And people had different views, and so they were asking Jesus. And Jesus really kind of lays it out and says that if you marry someone who got necessarily divorced for those wrong reasons, that's like you're committing adultery. But if you're marrying someone who did get divorced and it was under like the legitimate reasons for divorce, he says then that's permissible.
So it really depends on the situation.
Yeah, and marriage and divorce, every single divorce I think is like, there's so much nuance with it. It's hard to say just like, be able to just go black and white, just go, oh, this is good, this is bad. I think it really takes a lot of, kind of discernment and nuance to be able to unpack that, because divorce and marriage and relationships are very complicated. So it's never easy.
So moving on to the thing that comes out of marriage and relationships eventually, kids and babies.
We got a lot of questions up there.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that.
There's a lot of those. There are.
Yeah, you guys
Yeah.
have lots of
Inquiring
questions.
minds
and
want to
babies.
know,
right.
where do babies come from?
Where do babies come from?
Right.
Are you going to start with that one, Lauren?
Sure.
Or do you want me to explain?
No, I'll do the lovely task. All right, so
I like
There it
the just wondering.
Just wondering.
just wondering.
Just curious.
We're all let's say, female egg meets male sperm via sex. You cannot have babies by kissing. I'm sorry, that's not how it works.
You actually have to have sexual intercourse.
You have to have sex. For more details on that, you should ask your parents.
But
There it
egg
is.
sperm inside the woman grows for 9 months, comes
Comes
out.
out. There
Baby.
it is. Baby.
Yeah.
There it is.
Well, there you go. The long and short of it.
More questions, go ask your parents.
At what age can you have a baby?
Well,
Okay.
I think there's a couple different factors that you have to consider with these questions, and not just this one, multiple of these questions. You have to think, what is the biological answer? What is the moral answer? And what's the practical answer?
Oh, man.
So,
Yeah. So, yeah, because
go ahead.
because we want to address the biological, because the biological and what God says about it are going to be different,
True.
very different. But then we're also going to see how, from a practical perspective, hopefully we're going to see how the practical reinforces what God has to say about it. So, yeah.
So biologically, women can have babies once they start their period.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
So
whether that's a good idea, practically,
The 2 men up here are uncomfortable with
Yeah.
that one.
practically, you start your period at a young age, and your body isn't actually fully developed yet. So you can have medical problems if you have a baby when you're younger, and if you don't wait till you're
Till you're kind of
Fully
you
developed
completed puberty. Yeah,
So
there's some medical
that's a practical
complications.
side, and it goes along with the moral side of first comes marriage, and then comes babies. So
Yeah, and so on the flip side, guys, when can you get a girl pregnant? It's also at the beginning of puberty is when you can get a girl pregnant. Again, that's what we're saying is we should follow God. And how do you know you have started puberty? Is when your testicles start getting bigger. There it is. That's how you know that you've started puberty.
He's not wrong.
awkward.
Awkward.
Ever
But
so slightly.
so it depends because for you each person is different. There's no like set age. It's when those things start.
You hear voices start changing and getting kind of weird.
Yeah,
and funny. Yeah.
For guys, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, funny things. So with all that, I heard, and we started to get into it, do you have to be married to have a baby?
Technically, no.
From
Biologically,
from a biological standpoint.
you don't have to. You could. Whether that's wise.
Because what we've been talking about is understanding God's framework and blueprint and design for us and how he created us, intended us to live our lives. He went and said, even though you can have babies before you get married, he says, that's the place where it's going to be best. And so if you think back to, I kind of summarized everything at the beginning. If we say that sex is good inside marriage and marriage is between a man and a woman, then it's kind of like, okay, well, babies then are to be inside that marriage. And that's where God says that's where it's going to be best. And actually the data that we have from a sociological standpoint is they've done studies and go like, what do kids need? What are some of the things that kids need in order to grow up to be stable, to mature, and successful adults? And what they found is that kids being from a marriage with a mom and a dad is one of those key factors, especially having the dad present. The dad being present is like a huge, huge thing. That doesn't mean that single moms, single dads is wrong. It just means that it's showing that when we follow God's plan and blueprint, that it has the potential to be better that way. Not to discount any families that are different from that, who are trying to honor God and to glorify God in their lives and in their marriage. But that's where God says that's where it's going to be most likely to be best.
So with that being said, can I be a single mom?
You? No.
Oh, wrong plumbing. Gotcha.
We did have a...
We might need to have a talk after this.
Yeah, we did have... Is that a... Yeah.
Why do men have nipples?
All
I
right.
think you'll have to ask God when you get to heaven.
Scary face.
All right. I was going with the fact that you gave me a couple of good questions earlier, but we'll bypass that.
We're gonna skip over that one.
Is it spare body?
Okay.
Is it selfish to want things
So is it selfish to want to get married, to have sex, and to have babies before God comes back?
No,
No,
not at all.
not at all. I think, so really funny story. So Lauren and I and and Roy and Sam and
Sam and
Leo,
Leo.
we were at a conference, and in the conference, the speaker is talking, and he's going like, it's like he's talking about people who are like, oh, I'm just ready to go see Jesus. And he said, at the time, I'm a single guy, and I'm like, I'm not ready to see Jesus. God, I want to have sex. Like, I don't want to die yet. And I don't think it's wrong to have the desire to want to have sex. I don't think
That's
it's
fair.
wrong to have the desire to be married. I think I had those same thoughts when I was in high school. It's like, God, don't take me yet. I want to get married. I want to have sex.
It's totally
I
fine.
think that's fairly normal, and I don't think it's wrong and selfish to have the desires for those things because God created us that way. God created us for relationships, for intimacy. He created us with the desire to be sex, and he said, again, that's good. He just said, in order to enjoy it in the way that I intended it, I want you to have it here. And this is where it's going to be a blessing. This is where it's good. And yeah. Roy, do you want to check his question and see if it's a good one? All right.
We're gonna
And we'll
vet
move on.
them
Yes.
a little bit.
Yes.
Oh, we have
All
an
right.
approval.
We got approval. Oh, can you have
That
babies
is a
in
good
heaven?
question.
Since we are not given in marriage, I will say no. I don't think there's anything. Okay. All right. I don't know. We're going to go with John in the back. Adoption?
Is adoption bad, is what I heard.
No,
No.
that's wonderful.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
When someone, an orphan who doesn't have parents or is in a position, or their parents aren't in a position to take care of them, whether do they just recognize that, it's hard circumstances, or, in the case of some people I know that they adopted and fostered kids when their parents were drug addicts and were not able to care for the baby and providing a hostile environment for the kid. The adoption is beautiful. And it actually tells us that in Scripture, one of the pictures that is used to describe God's relationships with us is that he adopted us. He says, you were an orphan, alone, destitute, out there, and everything is horrible for you, because back then there was no social services and orphanage and stuff like that. If you were an orphan, you were pretty much had to fend for yourself on the streets. It was not good. And God, in the picture is that God says, I'm going to adopt you and make you my son, my daughter. And so adoption is a beautiful thing.
All right, this next one is really touchy for a lot of people. It's really touchy out in society and whatnot, but I do think it's something important to understand a biblical perspective on. Is it okay to get an abortion?
You want to start or do you want
You
me
can
to?
start. I've been talking a lot.
All right. Well, I think first we have to understand the definition of what an abortion is. So, an abortion is the intentional, knowingly choosing to kill a viable pregnancy. That viable means it's alive, it's going to grow.
It's going to live.
It's going to live. I think you need to understand that first, because there are
And even if there's a small chance that it lives.
Yeah,
Let's say
even if there's a small chance.
It's
because there are some pregnancies, I don't know the term.
it's escoplastic pregnancies.
There we go.
Yeah.
Where the baby, the egg, doesn't attach to the woman in the right location. It's not in the uterus where it's supposed to be. It's in the tube. And there is a 0% chance that baby will live because they can't get nutrients.
And
So that is not a viable pregnancy.
Yeah, typically those pregnancies, the baby dies at 8 weeks, sometimes up to 14 weeks is how long those babies will survive before they die, just on their own.
Yeah.
But if you wait to 14 weeks,
The woman can have very dangerous issues because it could explode her tube and cause internal bleeding. It's bad. So that's one circumstance where that's not a viable pregnancy, where that is acceptable. Another one is if this happened to me, a woman gets pregnant and the baby dies. You have a miscarriage. Then the baby is inside of you still. Your body hasn't shed it and kicked it out. And so taking an abortion pill to remove that dead body from you, that's not an abortion. I mean, you're taking the same pill, but it's not an abortion because the baby's already deemed dead. So that's a circumstance.
Yeah. So those words that you used were very important. It's an intentional termination, killing, ending of a pregnancy that would otherwise likely survive and live and have a baby that's born, even whether it's healthy or not. Because sometimes you can have babies that are born with different disabilities or deformities, and that's still a valuable child.
Now, aside from those circumstances that I said were not viable, I believe any other abortion is wrong because you are choosing to kill an innocent life. Now, I know that there's an argument that often comes up about what about rape? Or what about incest? Or what about if the woman's life is in jeopardy? Now,
those are two different
those
things.
are that.
Those
Now,
aspects.
the percentage of rapes, of abortions that occur from rapes, is a fraction of a percentage. It's not even 1%. It's a fraction of a percentage. And we as a culture don't make rules for the exceptions. So we shouldn't make an entire, it's okay for anyone when it's a fraction of a percentage. But with that,
Yeah. With that, I've read multiple different stories, and actually one of the people, when I was in youth group, they showed a video of a lady doing a talk about, sex and the reason why we should abstain from sex and that kind of stuff. And so my youth pastor kind of put it on the video. But we watched that, and then she went and she said, well, I am a product of rape. And she said, my mom was raped. My mom chose not to have abortion. And here I am talking to you about this. And she says, my life has value, worth, dignity, and meaning. And what she was saying, and this is what I've read about in a lot of others, these different cases, and when moms choose to keep the babies in those circumstances, is those kids are some of the catalyst for healing from that traumatic, evil, horrific experience. And I can't even imagine, I can't really even say what I would want to do to someone who commits rape, because it's such an evil, horrible, horrific thing. But we don't we go, that is horrible and wrong, but we don't say, let's do something else that is also horrible and evil and kill this baby as a result of someone else's sin. We don't take one sin to try to fix another sin. And I think that's an important thing to recognize. And so that was one, and the other, I'm trying to remember what the other.
the other one was the potential of a woman's life being in jeopardy. But in all honesty, if a woman's life is in jeopardy, they're just going to do a C-section and remove the baby. They're not going to do an abortion, because at that point, it's faster to just remove the baby and put him in a little incubator.
It's safer.
It's safer for the
mom.
woman and the baby. So that
Yeah.
argument is kind of thrown out the window.
Is that abortions are not 100% foolproof. They have medical consequences, and actually C-sections are safer than abortions. For mom and baby. Well, obviously baby, but for mom too. All right. Is that a good question over there, Bruno? What? How do Plan Bs work? So Plan B is kind of like the drug that Lauren was talking about. It is a drug that you take that basically induces delivery. And so it basically delivers that baby extremely prematurely before it has the ability to survive outside the womb. So typically, if you take it right away, it causes the uterine lining to like shed. It basically forces you to start your period. All right. Is that a good question? All right. That's a very good question. That's a very good question. And so, is it good to have an abortion because that baby was born out of sin? Exactly. So I'm just making sure I understand your question, and so everyone else can hear it. And I would say to that is no, because we don't try to fix sin, the consequence of sin, with more sin. And kids are always a blessing from God. That's what God said from the very beginning. Be fruitful and multiply. This is a blessing. And as you look at this, there's a distinction of the act was wrong. And let's say even going to this other question of like, well, what if you have a kid out of wedlock? That's a sinful act too. That's wrong too, to have a kid if you're not married, because you're having sex outside of marriage. And so we go, well, do we kill that kid? No, we go recognize that kid is still, like, that kid is not wrong. The kid is not wrong. The baby's not wrong. What brought it about might have been wrong, but the kid isn't. And so we don't punish and kill the kid because of the mistake that the parents have made.
I mean, you can look at Solomon, right? David and Bathsheba got together, and that was like straight up wrong. And the child that came out of that wound up being king of Israel, as well as continuing the line that eventually led to Christ.
There was the baby
The baby did die.
the one that Bathsheba, David's.
They had
another baby.
Solomon was the second.
My bad.
Solomon was the second.
Solomon was the second one. That's
Second
right,
one.
because his first one, bad example.
All
That
right,
was a
bad
bad example.
That
All
was
right.
way bad.
Okay.
I can say that that ties in with the adoption question, right? An instance like that, like I would be thrilled to be able to come in and help someone in what I'm sure is a terribly difficult situation, that is they're having such a hard time, and like we could come in and adopt that baby and take that what could be potentially a burden for whatever reason that it came about. Like, I think that's a beautiful example of when adoption is absolutely warranted and a beautiful thing, because you can help someone out of a difficult situation with something like that.
Oh. Alrighty.
All right.
What's next? We've got 21
We're going into the other category.
The other category.
Other category. This question's fun. I'm going to read it two ways because I believe it could be two different
A
ways.
typo. There might
I
have been
think
a
it might be a typo. But it says, if women supposedly are or ate, one or the other, the forbidden fruits first, then how come men have Adam's apples and not women? Explain that.
Explain that. Okay, so I'm going to go, if women supposedly are, because there has been this thing of people go, oh, women are the forbidden fruit, like women are bad, and women seduce, and they were the one who was deceived, and it's like you have to watch out for him, and they're trying to pull you away from God. And that is theological vomit, because it is so horribly wrong, okay? That is so horribly, that is such a wrong view of women. It is not good, it's wrong. I call it theological vomit, because it's just a whole bunch of ideas that are just like, blah, out there, and it's not good. Okay, so we'll leave that there, and then we'll go on to, what was it,
If women supposedly
ate the forbidden fruits, and the forbidden fruit is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we have no idea what that fruit actually is, because that tree is no longer among us.
It's not an apple.
It's not an apple.
It's
Okay?
not an apple, guys.
It's not an apple. So I think I was looking this up, and it was first depicted as wheat, the forbidden fruit, then grapes and citrons, and it was around the 1200s that the first person drew it in a picture, in a painting of an apple, and that one is just stuck. People go, oh, it's going to be an apple. So it's not an apple, so that's, first off, it's not an apple. And then how come men have Adam's apples, not women? So if you don't know what an Adam apple is, Adam's apple is this little bump here.
The bump on your neck.
It is called
I do not have one.
the laryngeal prominence of the thyroid cartilage. That is what it's called. And so this actually came from a myth that people said that as Adam was eating the forbidden fruit, which they thought was an apple, that it got stuck in his throat and made the bump.
And somehow y'all get it after thousands of generations.
Yeah. And it's
Makes
just like,
no sense.
This is like, it's kind of ridiculous. It's like saying men have facial hair because the tree of the knowledge of good and evil had moss growing on it, and now men have like moss growing on their face. It's that ridiculous. So the Adam's apple has nothing to do with eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It grows because of testosterone, which happens in puberty, which is related. So just like men get stronger and denser bones and facial hair, men also get this laryngeal prominence of the thyroid cartilage.
So, how can animals not be spiritual creatures?
You want to tackle that one?
Seriously.
Well, animals were created on earth as physical beings. And in Genesis, we read that only humans were made in the image of God, meaning that we are both physical like animals and spiritual like God.
Mm-hmm. We're the only ones created in his image.
In his image.
Animals weren't created in the image of God, so
They aren't spiritual beings.
they aren't spiritual beings,
sorry.
which means that your particular dog, Fido, is not going to be in heaven, but there will be dogs in heaven, okay?
Yeah.
All right?
So don't be disappointed. You will have animals to hug and love in heaven.
And I think with the curse taken away, that those animals then will live forever because death has been
Can I
defeated.
have a pet tiger then?
I mean, lions are
I
going to
want
lay
one.
down with lambs.
I want one.
I know.
I'm
You're
down.
okay.
You can't get hurt in heaven. I'm gonna have a pet tiger.
You're going to have a pet tiger.
There it is.
All right.
All right.
So, what is manhood and womanhood, and why is that a thing?
Okay. All right. So this question, I think, was submitted before we talked about that. That if you want to go back and listen to that one, that was the last one. It's on, if you go to our webpage in the youth, you can watch all the lessons over again. And so basically, manhood is the servant leadership to provide, to protect, and to lead. And they're doing it with a serving, sacrificial way, so that they're doing it not for their own self-gain and tyranny of selfishness. It's done out of self-control. It is done out of love for what is going to bring people most to God. It should be done in a way that is humble submission to God.
So, what can I do
All right.
to become
We're
better?
gonna-
Do we want to talk
Oh,
about womanhood?
My bad. I'm just moving along.
moving along.
Don't
So I
mind
guess
me.
I'm talking about womanhood as a woman. It is being the, as you said, invaluable helper. So, in a sense, men are incomplete without the help of women. And so they come along to encourage and support and nurture and help flourish, bring the best of the men in their family.
Yeah, and so really together, this idea is that they complement one another in how they live and what they do, and they both have equal dignity, value, and worth. They're different, and they recognize that they both bring something of value that's unique and different to the relationship, and that's good, and they need to use them together to glorify God. Yeah.
Yeah, you can move on.
Okay, now I can go. See, I'd be way off if there weren't women to like, hey, you're on the wrong track, man. Hang on a second. Pump the
Thanks,
brakes.
Amanda.
She's the best. So what do I do to become better for God and my community and my family?
And so I think the way that we're better for God, our community, and our family is to really follow what Jesus says is the first and greatest commandment, which is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, your strength. So basically everything that you have, everything that you are, not just, I'm going to love God with my Sunday mornings or my Sunday nights or with the people who are easy to love. It's with everything. It's with your grades. It's how you treat your siblings and your parents and work and all of those different things. Everything that you do is you're saying, I'm going to love God with it. And so that's the first thing. So if you're doing that, you're going to have a great relationship with God. And if you're doing that, it's going to make it easier to have a great relationship with people around you and be able to do the second part, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. And as you love your neighbor as yourself, you're treating them in the way that you want to be treated. And so when you do that, you're going to be a blessing to your family and your community.
So why is love and trust so important for our community?
You want to answer that one?
I was going to answer the last one. You answered it.
Uh-oh.
You stole
Okay,
my question.
I stole your question. When we love, let me back up. Trust, I think, is really important. So when you're driving down the street, you're going to trust that the people around you are going to follow the rules of the road and not drive down the wrong side of the street and crash into you. So
That's a lot of
sometimes
trust.
they don't. I know. It's a lot of trust. We have a lot of trust in a community. In order to thrive and succeed, there needs to be an understanding of like, hey, there's a right and a wrong, and a trust that we're going to follow through. And when communities don't have this, there isn't this trust, things break down. And I'm not going to trust that you're going to return the wallet when I lose it, and or you're not going to steal. And if everyone was stealing, they would be like, oh, that'd be a really, really big problem. And so there's this trust is really important. And that really trust comes out of this idea of love, of treating people with respect and treating people like they have dignity, value, and worth, and treating them in the image of God.
All right, getting into the hot topic ones. We're running out of time. We got to make sure we hit this one.
Okay.
The important category, sex.
Sex.
If you're supposed to wait until marriage, how come my parents didn't? I feel you, bro.
So, I'll take this one.
Oh boy.
So, we are telling you God's ideal blueprint. The ideal, like Stephen said, for you to have the most joy and have your life flourish the best. This is an ideal situation. Now, we're in a world of sin. We mess up. You might mess up, your parents might mess up, and that doesn't mean that God can't use the non-ideal. It just means that it might be harder. And so we are encouraging you to follow God's ideal because we want your life to be, in a sense, the easiest and the most fulfilling and the most
Gives us
pleasing to God.
Yeah, and it puts us in a right relationship
In a right
with
relationship with God.
God. Because
And-
sin breaks the right relationship with God as well.
And so, whether your parents, for whatever reason, if your parents didn't follow the ideal, God can still use that to be a blessing. I mean, you are a blessing for them. But that doesn't mean that it was the most ideal, best situation.
And Lauren, have you ever done something that you don't want our kids to model and do?
Absolutely. All the time.
I do that too. There's lots of things that I do in my life that I go, I don't want my kids to do this same stupid thing that I just did. And I'm sure your parents have a lot of things that they've done wrong and things that are stupid and go, They're probably going, I don't want my kids to follow and do the same, make the same mistakes as we do. Our parents are not perfect. Our parents are not perfect. We need to hear that. I'm not perfect.
You have to
No one is perfect.
Give your parents some grace, okay? Because just like everyone, they mess up. We all mess up. So I don't want you guys to go home and start like critiquing your parents. Like, that's not the point of this. The point is to show you what's ideal and then go have forgiveness, have grace with your parents, and maybe learn from their situation to discover what might be what they did well and what you could choose to do better.
Because you could have this conversation, if the person who wrote this, or maybe you feel like you fit in this boat, of like, and you go, well, why? Like, well, we can't answer why.
Yeah, I can't answer why your parents. Sorry, I don't
Probably
know.
because sex feels good. Probably. But you need to have that conversation with your parents. And if you have that with your parents and go, hey, why did you do this? What did you learn from it? And you go from it not to as a way to like condemn them or try to like, poke at them or whatever, but to really like to learn from them and say, I want to learn. How was this for you? How did this help you in your relationship with God? How did it not? Or what were some of the things? Have an honest discussion with them about that. And I think that could actually be a very meaningful discussion that you have with your parents. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of dreading this question.
Steven's answering it.
I'm gonna add an extra twist of difficulty to it.
Alrighty.
Just because I love you.
Just because you want to.
Try not to laugh. What is masturbating? I know this is weird, but can you explain that? And what I'm gonna add on to, is it bad?
Okay. Yeah, because I was thinking about this too. Is like, I'll tell you guys a little bit about what masturbating is, but then I'm going to also spend a little bit more time on what does God think about it? Okay, so first, masturbating is sexually stimulating yourself for the purpose of sexual pleasure and climax. Okay, that's what masturbating is. If you need to know more, again, go talk to your parents, okay?
It can be male or female. Just notating.
Yep.
There it is.
So that's sexually stimulating yourself for the purpose of pleasure and typically sexual climax. So, and then the question is, well, what does God say about this? And if you read the Bible and you go through the whole thing, you will find absolutely nothing in there about masturbation.
Super helpful.
Like, okay, well, does that mean that it's just a free-for-all? And we go, well, God did give us some framework to understand sex. And since masturbation is a sexual activity, so he does give us some framework to be able to understand it. So the first one that we think about is in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus tells us that it's not just the person who goes and has sex with not their spouse. He says the person who even lusts after someone that's not your spouse, that also is adultery, which he says this is wrong, this is morally wrong, you're breaking a relationship. So typically, masturbation incorporates lust of some sort. And especially now living in the digital age that we have where pornography is so rampant, it's typically it goes alongside with viewing and watching or reading pornography. And so we go, okay, well, if it's a byproduct of lust and pornography and fantasizing all that, then the answer is yes, absolutely, 100% of the time. That's
Answer
wrong.
yes of what?
That masturbating is wrong,
Okay,
is bad. Okay, so then we also have this framework to think about of, well, why did God make sex? God made sex to deepen marriage relationships. That's part of its purpose. The marriage sex, that's where the pleasure side of it is supposed to come in and deepen those relationships. It's supposed to produce kids in the right time and all that kind of stuff. And so if we have that being our framework of that sex is always done inside of relationship, and that's how God kind of created sex to be, then masturbating is taking sex outside of the relationship that God intended it for and just focusing not on it being a gift that you give to your spouse, but it's completely selfish. And if you think about in the framework of God, is selfishness is always viewed as something that's not good, because our mind should be not on just ourselves and whatever makes us feel good. Not that those things are inherently wrong, but if our sole purpose and point and way of thinking is about me, that goes against kind of like the whole point of we're following Christ first. We're trying to bring glory and honor to Christ. So if that's our framework, then we go, well, masturbating doesn't necessarily fit that framework. And so I would say it's generally wrong. Just because the Bible isn't specifically clear is why I'm not going to say it's 100% wrong, but generally, because of those two things, I would say masturbation is wrong. Is that a good question? All right, Bruno. What outside of the marriage? Masturbating outside of the marriage?
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
All right, moving
Move
on.
it on.
So the next category we have is the LGBTQA plus stuff. Is gayness bad?
Okay. Is gayness bad?
Is gayness bad?
I think first you have to define what you mean by gayness, because there's finding people attractive, and then there's acting on those feelings. And so finding or like seeing someone as attractive isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like I'm attracted to Steven. I can look at another man and say, that man's attractive, and then escape it from my mind and think nothing else. That is not bad, because I'm not thinking about that other guy in any lustful or intentional way. I'm just acknowledging, hey, he's an attractive guy. That's fine. Same if I were to look at women. I can look at another woman and say, hey, she's an attractive woman. I'm not going further with that. I'm just acknowledging, hey, God made her beautiful. There it is, the end. So in that regard, those thoughts aren't bad.
They're not inherently
They're
sinful.
not inherently sinful. They're acknowledging that God made a beautiful person.
Yeah.
But it's what you do with them that can result in sin.
Yeah, because if you think about it, let's say you're straight, and we had the question earlier of, is it wrong to desire to have, sex and get married and have kids and stuff and look forward to that? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's something that I think God gave us. But when we go, well, they still have to have control over our thoughts. Because if you aren't married, you shouldn't be lusting after that person. Even if there is that desire to one day have sex and be married, you shouldn't be lusting after that person. And so whether you're straight or whether your desires are of the person of the same sex as you still have to be in complete control over your thoughts and your desires. God calls us to have self-control and to bring glory to him in those things, whether you're opposite sex attracted or same sex attracted. So, but then there's the other piece of like, well, there's the attraction side, and then there's, well, are you actually going and having gay sex? And the Bible is fairly clear. Genesis starts off in Genesis. Here's the model. Sex is between man and woman in marriage. And then in Leviticus, it goes in and says, men who sleep with men is wrong. And then it actually says that 2 places in Leviticus. And then Romans, Paul says, the reason why people start actually having gay sex is is because they forgot about God. And because they forgot about God, they took something that was good and then they twisted it and perverted it. And then he goes on and says in 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy, he gives this list and says, these are things that are wrong. And then he also goes and says, these are things that some of you guys actually were doing. living out homosexual relationships. He says this is something that you guys actually were doing, but shouldn't be doing anymore as Christians. So is gayness bad? Going and having gay sex, because even if we follow our blueprint backwards of sex is where? Inside marriage. What is marriage? Between one man and one woman. That's how God created it. So if we follow that, we go, gay sex is wrong. That's wrong. The act is wrong. But the desires aren't sinful in them of themselves. It's what you're doing with them.
I think it's important to also remember that anything in this category, LGBTQ, whatever, that the choice of that act is just another sin. Just like lying, just like getting drunk, just like stealing. To God, they're all the same sin. And so we still love those people and share Christ with those people. We just don't condone and support their sin.
Yeah, just like I wouldn't condone two people who chose to live together and not being married and they're having sex in that relationship.
'Cause
I
it's
said
a sin.
that's wrong too. So we're going to call that wrong. We're going to call gay sex wrong because why? Because they don't fit inside God's blueprint. And the reality is, as we continue through in life, there's going to be more things that show up that are what we would call sexually perverse or outside. And so as long as we keep track of what is true, and this is why I've focused so much on this is God's blueprint for us, the more things that pop up out here, we can recognize that, does it fit inside? And we go, no, it doesn't. So we're not going to condone that. We're just going to stick inside this box here that's true. And it doesn't matter what new inventions around sexuality that our culture comes up with, we're going to stay inside God's design and blueprint.
So that being said, can you be gay if you are a Christian? And I guess you could probably put that the other way around too. Can you be a Christian if you are gay?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. Paul himself says that some of you guys, he's talking to the Corinthian church and says, some of you guys were living out homosexual relationships. And he says, you're called not to do that anymore. Christians, you're not called to live those out. And so even though there may be the desire and the attraction, there's a couple people that I read their books. One is Ed Shaw, and he's a pastor in England, and he is attracted to other guys. And what he has done, he decided to, in order to glorify God and to follow God's blueprint for his life, he decided that for him, that is going to mean that he is going to be celibate. He's not going to get married. He's not going to have sex. And so that's what he decided, how he's going to glorify God as a Christian, as a pastor who has same-sex attractions. And then there's another book that I was reading, and it's by Rebecca McLaughlin. And this book is called 10 Questions Every Teen Should Ask and Answer About Christianity. It's a great book, and actually she talks about this particular topic in that book. And she can talk about it because she herself was attracted to other girls. She dreamt about getting married, but in her dreams, it wasn't a guy, it was another girl. And so she had to wrestle with this question as well, like, how do I glorify God as a Christian who is attracted to other women? And so for her, it was different. She, in the course of her life, she actually found a guy and ended up marrying him. And she's been married around 15 years, and they have a couple of kids. And so for her, it was choosing to say, I'm going to direct that relationship, those sexual attractions to a male, even though it's not my natural inclination, that's what I'm going to choose to do with it. And so for her, it was different. And I don't think that there's one blanket, this is how you have to live as someone who is a Christian, who is trying to glorify God, as someone who's attracted to the same sex. There's the big blacked off area of don't have sex with them, don't lust after them, just like straight people.
Don't enter relationships with them.
Yeah, don't enter
Intimate
into romantic relationships with them. But he says that there's different ways that we can live that out and still bring glory to God in our relationships and bring glory to God through our sexuality.
I think it's important to remember that, like, can you be, quote, gay and be a Christian? Well, are you striving after God? Are you working on that sin and repenting and turning away? Like, like Stephen said, the people in Rome, somewhere?
Rome?
Well, in the Bible, they was talking
Yeah,
about.
in
used
Romans.
to be, yeah.
Or the
They-
Corinthians, yeah.
They were practicing in gay intercourse, and then they turned to Christ. And so they're no longer practicing that. They're not continuing in that. They're turning away and following towards God and repenting. And so it really depends on, are you like, well, this is who I am, and so you gotta love me because I'm gonna keep doing it. Well, no, I'd say you're not really a Christian at that point because you're not striving after following Christ.
God always calls us to holiness, and sometimes that's a process of like, kind of, what's the next one? If you can have a gay friend, and I know we're kind of,
We are behind.
We're a
So if
little
your
behind.
parents are here and you gotta go, you can go.
I understand. But if you have a gay friend, is you love them, and you don't try to change them. That's something that only God can really do. We can't change people's hearts and desires, and God does that. And when someone becomes a Christian, it isn't going to happen automatically either. It's something that God typically, has to work in that person's life. And even recently, I go like, God convicts me about something, and like, God, I've been doing that for the last 20 years of my life, and you finally now decide to start convicting me about this? What about the previous 20 years? And then it's like, well, there were more pressing things to work on. And I'm like, okay, all right, God, I'll give you that. So
That's fair.
it's fair. It's like there was more important things for you to fix in me first before we get to this point. And so it's always a continual process of we becoming more and more Christ-like. God is always calling us to holiness in our lives. And so, yeah, you have a gay friend. As you love them, you bring them to Christ first. You point them to Christ. You care about them. You don't ostracize them, and you want to point them to Christ in that relationship.
And if you have a gay friend and you want to know like how to talk more with them about this situation, because I understand that it can be a really challenging situation, you can come talk to Stephen and I. We can help you out. I'm sure you have books.
I have some
on
different
it
books
too.
that
But
we
just
can
like
recommend, read
how
together.
to approach it, like questions to ask, or like how to communicate it in a loving way. Because the goal isn't to like break that friendship and destroy that friendship. It's to be loving to them and show Christ to them and hopefully lead them to Christ.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty similar to the transgender, right?
I was going to say that. It kind of fits.
Yeah.
It's those kind of those same ideas as if you are transgender, recognizing, I think the first thing to realize that if you go, can I be transgender and a Christian, is is recognizing that how we feel about ourselves and is sometimes really wrapped up with what our culture says is male and female, which is stereotypes. And you go, well, if I'm male, maybe I don't do the stereotypical male things, but I can still be a leader, I can still protect, I can still provide, I can still do those high-level things of what God has called men to be, and not like football.
That's totally okay.
That's totally okay. Or whatever the big manly thing is. There's, that we don't necessarily all fall into the typical stereotype. No one does. Everyone is outside of the stereotype in some way.
So it really
Men
kind
and
of
women.
becomes a question of willful disobedience.
It's like, am I going to choose to ignore how God created me and live in some other way? And I think God is calling us to, if you are transgender and a Christian or having feelings of dissonance between how you feel about yourself and your body, God's calling to say, well, even with that dissonance, how do you bring glory to me as a man or as a woman? Because that's how I created you. That's the body that you're in, because the two are connected. Our minds and our bodies and our souls, they're interconnected. They're not something that's separate. They are intertwined.
All right, the last one we've got.
Final one.
Aromantic and asexual. Could you explain them and if they are sinful or not?
Okay, do you want to do asexual?
Sure. So, asexual is when you have no desire for either gender. You
That's-
just have no desire for a sexual relationship at all. You're not attracted to anyone.
Yeah, kind of those two sides. And this is all general.
Yeah.
You're not attracted to anyone. You wouldn't, if you were looking at the LGBT, people wouldn't say, oh, I'm lesbian or I'm gay or I'm bi or something. I would just say,
You're just
I'm not
literally,
attracted to
I'm
people.
not attracted to anyone.
Or they have
There it
no
is.
sexual desire.
Yeah.
They don't have that desire that was asked earlier. It's like, oh, it was okay to desire to have sex. And so asexual is like, there isn't that desire that's there.
One of the two.
Aromantic is different. Now, these can overlap. Think of like, if you have a Venn diagram or two circles, there's like, we've got blue and we got pink, and they overlap, and there's purple in the middle. No purple, okay?
No purple.
No purple, right now. But there's that overlap, and so these two things, they can kind of overlap, but they can be distinct. And so aromantic is they don't have a desire for a romantic relationship. They don't want a boyfriend. They don't want a girlfriend. They don't want to get married. That's not something that's a desire of theirs. They're fine being single. That doesn't mean that they don't want or have meaningful relationships. They will have meaningful relationships. It's just that they're not going to be romantic in nature. So, yeah.
And either of these are not sinful. There is no problem with you remaining single your entire life. Paul actually says that's beneficial because you can focus more on serving God. So, having no desire to get married, having no desire to be in a romantic relationship, having no desire to have sex, that is totally fine. Not sinful whatsoever.
Jesus wasn't married.
It's true.
Jesus didn't have sex. So, yeah. So, generally they're not sinful. The only point where we get sinful, and that's kind of happens with all of these, is when we say this identity of myself becomes more important than my relationship with God. That's the defining thing first for me, is, oh, I am gay, I am lesbian, I am transgender, I am aromantic, I am asexual. And that precedes your relationship with God. And so sometimes we also do this with our country. We go, oh, I'm an American first, rather than, no, I'm a Christian first. And so as Christ followers, we go, my identity is first and foremost in Christ, and everything else after that.
We made it.
We made it.
A little overdue, but
A
we made
little
it.
overdue. Whew. I'm sorry. Thank you for sticking in there. I think we fielded a couple too many audience questions
Yeah.
at the beginning, but we made it through. Let me
Great
pray for
questions,
us.
guys.
Let me pray for us, and we'll be out of here. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this night. I thank you for these thoughtful questions. And I love questions because it means that people are thinking and are trying to understand how do we live this life in a way that is pleasing to you, God. And so help us, God, to understand your plan, your design for us, how you created us, and it's good, and help us to follow that, even when the world around us doesn't follow it, even when some of the people that we look up to, when they make mistakes. And so, God, help us to bring glory to you with our lives and our relationships. And God, help us to treat others always with the dignity, with the respect, with the fact that they are in your image and they have value and worth. And as we go from here, bless our evening, watch over us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.